one of the questions I have, and in reading the book and kind of coming up with these questions and thinking about this event, is how do we get this conversation outside of the academy to the public at large? Because when you start talking about even suggesting that these are issues, or suggesting that there's a kind of plantation model in professional or college athletics, people immediately have such a kind of visceral reaction that no, that's not true. They throw out the word like post-racial and whatever. So how do you talk about this in a more, I guess, with the public more broadly, without kind of having someone accuse you of playing the race card or making everything about race, or to kind of get a better conversation around so that we can get some resolution on at least some of these issues?
Man, you find a great way, you let me know, because I am Captain Race Car according to the general population. And I don't know, the problem that I find we have is that somehow you got to find a way to talk about race that does not make white people believe that you're talking about them. And people across the board have a tendency to take things personally, but the ground the ground that has to be made up in the discourse is really a ground among white people. White people are the people that folks actually listen to. There has not been a significant movement of social change in this country that was not enthusiastically endorsed by some white person of consequence, that includes the civil rights movement, and people historically believe the turning point of the civil rights movement was the death of Goodman, Schroeder, and Cheney. Kind of ties into that point. And I'm not sure. Like when I've done radio, I found some decent ways to kind of talk to people that always involve me making it clear that I went to high school in Waller, Texas. You guys are what I know, like the dudes with the belt buckles and the cowboy hats and everything. That's what I grew up in. We did a 10-year reunion of a bar called Hoses and Harleys on FM 2920. Like once I was able to explain to them that we had that sort of commonality to them, like look, I grew up on Jones Road. I'm not exactly coming to you from mean streets of the Fifth Ward or nothing like that. Once they could do that, I found that we could get something done. But the problem is, not everybody's going to know me personally or well enough for me to be able to have that sort of discourse with them and to kind of set them at ease. And I just don't know how to talk. And I don't think anybody's come up with it. A way to talk about race that is both effective and doesn't threaten people. Because I think folks just have to realize generally. I think white people need to generally realize that we got a whole lot of problems here, and chances are you're the beneficiary of them. And I think black people need to recognize that while these white people are often the beneficiaries of the problem, I don't think that you'd be so quick to give your stuff back either. Once you have a bit of an understanding that people are in those two places, well, maybe you can find some level of dialogue, but it's not going to work with people slaughtering white people every time they make some sort of mistake when it comes to race. That's like, I talk to feminists who have the hardest time finding husbands because they just can't let it go when the dude makes a mistake on gender. Like, this is what's going to happen. We all grew up in the same madness. So growing up in the madness, unless you got some racism repellent that they don't sell in stores, what are you going to do, right? So I guess there's a level of patience that you got to have in the discourse and on an issue that, quite honestly, we've been too patient about. So I don't know. Like, I recognize the difficulty in that. I just think that I'm not in the business of shaking people's shoulders and trying to make them get it. But I do think you can't be afraid to shake the shoulders when the time comes,
Yeah, I think people are hesitant to admit that you can be, or I guess maybe it just isn't brought up enough, that you can be the beneficiary of kind of a racist system and structures without being a racist.
Yeah.
And it comes
up... But also, if you've been taught your whole life that if you work hard, you'll get all these good things. God forbid somebody tell you that it's more than hard work that got you there. I mean, that attacks people's self-esteem. It attacks their ego. So if I go in and get it for a job with somebody else and the other guy better than you, and one thing I can tell you, generally speaking, about white people in this country, you ain't getting very far talking about how the black dude is better than them, especially if you're the black dude in the discussion. And things get ugly real fast at that point, because the whole notion of race is the idea that even the lowest ranking white man is over the highest ranking black man. So much of that is ingrained, and there's so much to be teased out and so much to be unraveled that it's just going to take a whole lot of patience. Maybe not as much patience as we have exhibited, but maybe a little more than people want to give.
Bomani, I'm wondering in terms of starting this conversation and making it productive, do you think that there are ways, and I think some of the illustrative examples you provided kind of allow us to see ways that, more than just black people suffer from this type of system. Like, it's not just something that impacts young black men, but it actually does do damage to others. And so even if we could say it's about race, the implications can be felt even more broadly than just like one racial subpopulation. What do you
Yeah, because the only people I think that have really tried to convey that idea in this country to have and I don't know if a significant level of traction works, but just a level of traction, have been the Marxists and the unions. And neither one of them are very popular these days. But they're the ones that have the cause that kind of worked in that direction and made those points, because nobody wins with racism. Like the NFL, the coaching thing, I always try to explain to people that the biggest beneficiaries from this Rooney Rule that forces them to interview black candidates are the teams, because suddenly they're more aware of the labor market in a way they would not have been otherwise. Like they're the ones that actually win from doing this, and they don't want to win.
And I think it's really interesting the public backlash against the Rooney Rule. Like all it doesn't say they have to hire a certain number of black candidates. It just says that they have to interview them, and then when no black candidates, either they just pay the fine for not interviewing black candidates, or one doesn't get a job, people are so quick to say, well, there must not be any qualified black coaches out there. Because despite how long the NFL has been a league dominated by black players, that none of those people are better than the 50 guys that keep shuffling through the coaching jobs. None of those ex-players or anyone are more qualified than those kind of select tiny group of people.
Well, I think that people legitimately believe that the distributions of all these labor markets, I think they believe that this distribution is not the result of market failures. I think they legitimately believe that this is just kind of how it happened to work out. Because I think if you ask the median person on the street of any race, black, white, whatever, they would tell you they think that black people are less intelligent. They might not tell you that immediately, but you can then kind of tease it out after you figure it out. Because right, you see that deal with people all the time. It's like, oh man, well, I guess they just whatever happened to hiring the most qualified person. I'm like, well, when the hell did people start doing that? Like that would be newfound. If you acknowledge that there's an existence of racism, people are just of the belief or want to be of the belief now that there is no racism. Because if you say there's no racism, then whatever you've achieved has been on your own merits and it makes you feel better. But there's nothing about speaking to the existence of racism that makes anybody feel better. And I do think that the way people feel about themselves is a much more important variable in this than people recognize and realize. Self-identity and the ways that people determine what their values are, what they provide. That's huge. And racism has been used to prop that up in many, many, many cases. Look, I was reading, since we're in a race scholars forum, I was reading the new Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander's book on mass imprisonment and putting people in jail. Anyway, she the point that she makes that I think is very important is that every time that you see movement on these sorts of issues, what winds up happening is the right wing in this country goes so far to the right on the race that it forces the left to then move to the right to not make it look like it is the party or it is the side of black people. And gradually, that's how you wind up with this country that we got now, that for better or worse, no matter how you feel about it, what was once the center is now the way left. And that's how that winds up happening. And what they do is they exacerbate the fears of those people and their identity, all the identity issues and everything else. Those things thereby become exacerbated. Because if you think about it, the days of segregation, because of the existence of these two different sets of institutions, it was very possible for black people to reach a level of class that was superior to like a median white person on the other side, because you could be black and then have the potential to own something or whatever. Well, how in the world does he get to own something that I don't? Well, I guess we'll have to go take his stuff. And it just gradually goes like that, And that, I think, is the biggest thing that hamstrings the discussion, is that the person with no desire to productively participate then throws the discussion to such an extreme place that you're just holding off with the little bit you got. And you can go back to the William Jennings Bryans of the world and everything else. And I'd say since George Wallace got, I want to say 13% of the vote, which is a really big deal, we've seen the continuing exacerbation to the right on these things. In fact, the 1990s was probably the time more so that we saw people become more progressive in these discussions. And that's when Clinton decided, you know what? I need to shut down this welfare and show these people I'm tough on crime. It was his jump to the right. and that keeps happening, and I think that's probably more destructive than anything else.